The Political Philosophy of Cascadia, a manifesto of sovereign persons and living republics. Abstract. The political philosophy of Cascadia is not a dream spun from utopian abstraction, nor a rebellion born of chaos. It is the deliberate construction of a moral and legal order grounded in the timeless doctrines of natural right, the common law of free peoples, and the scientific and ecological knowledge of our age. It unites the natural rights republicanism of Locke and Jefferson, the distributist and mutualist economic ethics of Chesterton and Proudhon, the ecological consciousness of Leopold and Schumacher, and the cybernetic vision of Wiener and Hayek into one coherent system of liberty and accountability. Cascadia seeks not to abolish the inherited institutions of North America, but to purify them, retaining the civil and common law foundations of both the United States and Canada while radically expanding their capacity to safeguard personal liberty, local autonomy, and environmental equilibrium. It stands as a bridge between the old nations that have grown distant from their founding charters and a new confederation of sovereign persons who recognize that the legitimacy of all governance depends upon its obedience to natural justice. The following 13 principles expound the philosophical, constitutional, and economic pillars of this living republic. 1. Natural law and just naturalism. The first principle of Cascadia is that all law must arise from and conform to the higher order of moral truth known as natural law. This is the ancient doctrine that precedes all positive statutes and is older than any constitution, binding upon kings, parliaments, and assemblies alike because it originates not in human decree but in the immutable nature of justice. John Locke argued that even in a state of nature, individuals possess an inherent right to life, liberty, and property, and that any institution contravening these rights forfeits its claim to legitimacy. The Cascadian Constitution explicitly affirms this pre-political sovereignty of the individual, asserting that just naturalism is the principle of law throughout Cascadia, and that no act of legislature, executive order, or bureaucratic edict may stand if it violates the unalienable rights of a person. This principle guarantees that government is derivative, not generative, that the state is a servant of natural justice rather than its author. Natural law also provides the philosophical coherence that binds the moral and practical spheres of Cascadian life. It is not a metaphysical abstraction but a working standard of governance, ensuring that every policy, algorithm, and institutional design is measured against the question, does this serve the natural rights of human beings and the living world, or does it undermine them? It forms a moral hierarchy above the flux of politics, a north star that guides the interpretation of every statute and decision. Unlike legal positivism, which regards law as valid merely because it is enacted, just naturalism insists that law is valid only insofar as it is just. Hence, in Cascadia, a law, repugnant to natural or human rights is no law at all. The state does not create justice, it merely recognizes and implements it. This foundation unites the common law traditions of both the United States and Canada, for both nations trace their jurisprudence to the same English heritage wherein rights were understood to precede royal prerogative. The Magna Carta, the Petition of Right, the English Bill of Rights, and the American and Canadian Charters of Liberty all bear witness to this continuity. Cascadia, therefore, does not sever its lineage from its parent civilizations, it restores that lineage to vitality by refusing to subordinate justice to procedural formalism or administrative convenience. It honors the civil rights heritage of North America while extending it beyond national borders into the broader bioregion and moral community of the Pacific Northwest. Natural law in Cascadia extends beyond human relations into the ecological and technological domains. It commands that no law or industry shall destroy the conditions of life upon which liberty depends. To poison the rivers, devastate the forests, or monopolize digital communication is to commit an act of tyranny against both nature and man. The same principle that forbids slavery also forbids environmental despotism and informational censorship, for each violates the rightful domain of autonomous beings. Just naturalism, therefore, becomes a universal jurisprudence encompassing the human, the ecological, and the technological spheres alike. Finally, by rooting all governance in the moral law of reason and nature, Cascadia establishes a bulwark against tyranny. The citizen need not plead for rights as favors, for they are self-evident and immutable. The state is bound to acknowledge them, and every individual possesses standing to resist their violation. The law becomes not an instrument of command but an architecture of freedom, protecting the sovereign person from arbitrary authority. In this way, Cascadia fulfills the promise implicit in the American Declaration of Independence and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that all power must serve the cause of liberty, and that liberty itself is the measure of justice. 2. Popular sovereignty and the right to revolution. If natural law is the foundation of justice, then popular sovereignty is the mechanism by which that justice is defended. Cascadia recognizes that all political authority originates in the people, the collective of sovereign persons who voluntarily consent to mutual governance for the sake of peace, protection, and the preservation of natural rights. This principle, inherited from Locke and Jefferson, holds that governments are mere trustees of the people's will, and when they become destructive of liberty, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish them. Cascadia elevates this principle from an emergency recourse to a permanent constitutional condition. The right to revolution is not merely historical but perennial, a lawful and moral check upon the decay of institutions. By constitutionalizing the right to revolution, Cascadia does not glorify rebellion, it dignifies accountability. The state is perpetually aware that its legitimacy is conditional upon consent, and that the governed possess both the right and the duty to withdraw obedience from tyranny. This transforms the relationship between ruler and citizen from hierarchy to covenant, each bound by mutual obligation. It also ensures that patriotism in Cascadia is not loyalty to government, but loyalty to liberty. When institutions deviate from the principles of natural justice, it is not the reformer who commits treason but the tyrant who betrays the public trust. For Americans of the Pacific Northwest, this idea resonates with the revolutionary legacy of 1776, the assertion that freedom is the birthright of all men, not the gift of a state. For Canadians, it echoes the Charter's affirmation that rights and freedoms exist, subject only to such reasonable limits as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. Cascadia unites these traditions by recognizing that the people, not the legislature or judiciary, are the ultimate arbiters of reasonableness and justice. The right to reform or secede from unjust authority is not an act of rebellion but a restoration of rightful order. Popular sovereignty in Cascadia also manifests through direct participatory systems such as decentralized autonomous organizations (DAOs), community assemblies, and digital referenda. These institutions allow the people to exercise their sovereignty continuously rather than episodically. In contrast to the alienation of modern representative democracies, where the citizens' will is diluted by bureaucracy and lobbying, Cascadian governance restores immediacy to consent. Sovereignty becomes a living function, not a theoretical abstraction, sustained by transparent technology and civic virtue. Ultimately, the right to revolution in Cascadia is a principle of peace, not of violence. It exists to prevent oppression before blood is shed, reminding all officers of state that their power is conditional. It embodies the wisdom of Jefferson's dictum that the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time, not by the sword but by remembrance of first principles. Cascadia thus transforms the revolutionary right from a destructive impulse into a constructive discipline, the perpetual self-correction of a living republic. 3. Self-ownership and individual sovereignty. At the heart of Cascadian political philosophy lies the doctrine of self-ownership. Every human being, by virtue of consciousness and will, is the sole proprietor of their body, mind, labor, and destiny. This premise, drawn from the natural law tradition, serves as the ethical core of the entire constitutional order. Self-ownership means that no other person, group, or institution may rightfully compel the individual's actions, seize the fruits of their labor, or dictate the terms of their existence, except in defense of equal rights for others. It is the antithesis of collectivist and authoritarian doctrines which reduce persons to instruments of the state or economy. Cascadia's affirmation of self-ownership translates into practical jurisprudence. All laws are evaluated according to whether they protect or infringe upon the sovereignty of the individual. Taxation, regulation, and policing must be narrowly tailored to the defense of rights, not the management of life. The individual is the primary unit of sovereignty, and a state is its derivative construct. In this way, Cascadia reverses the hierarchy of modern politics. The citizen is not a subject of the state is a temporary trustee of the citizen's collective will. This conception aligns with both American and Canadian traditions. The American Declaration asserts that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, while the Canadian Charter guarantees life, liberty, and security of the person. Cascadia harmonizes these ideals by asserting that liberty is not merely procedural or civic but ontological, a property of the human condition. To violate it is to commit a metaphysical crime. Thus, in Cascadia, civil rights are not permissions granted by statute but manifestations of pre-political truths recognized by law. Self-ownership also implies the right to contract, associate, and withdraw consent. Cascadian society is built on voluntary cooperation rather than coercive uniformity. From economics to education to community life, individuals are free to organize their affairs according to their conscience, provided they respect the equal autonomy of others. This creates a pluralistic yet stable order, where freedom is not chaos but the natural harmony of self-directed beings coexisting under the rule of justice. In affirming individual sovereignty, Cascadia does not deny social responsibility, it refines it. True community arises only among free persons who choose to cooperate, not among subjects coerced into compliance. The voluntary covenant of a free people is the highest expression of human dignity. Self-ownership, therefore, is not selfishness but the moral foundation of empathy. Only those who possess themselves can freely give of themselves to others. Thus, Cascadia's individualism is humane, not atomistic, it is the soil from which genuine solidarity grows. 4. Limited, transparent, and accountable government. The Cascadian conception of government begins with humility. It holds that power, however necessary, is inherently dangerous, and that the only safe government is one that knows itself to be a servant rather than a master. To that end, Cascadia constructs a framework of radical limitation. No branch of authority may exceed the functions explicitly delegated to it by the Constitution, and every exercise of authority must be traceable to the consent of the governed. This recalls the Madisonian principle that ambition must be made to counteract ambition, but it extends that insight into the technological and administrative dimensions of modern life. Cascadia's government operates transparently through open data, accessible records, and auditable algorithms, ensuring that the people may observe every function of the machinery that claims to act in their name. This transparency transforms the abstract concept of accountability into a living daily practice. The reasoning for such radical openness is moral as well as practical. Power thrives in darkness, corruption germinates in secrecy. By making all governmental information public by default, Cascadia denies secrecy its natural habitat. It thereby realizes what both Jefferson and Bentham envisioned, that publicity is the soul of justice. In practice, this means that no decision affecting the public can be hidden behind classification or bureaucratic obscurity. In the digital era, where governments wield both surveillance technology and administrative opacity, Cascadia's model reclaims informational asymmetry for the citizen. It is the state, not the individual, that must live in a glass house. The people may observe the rulers may not pry upon the private lives of those they serve. The legal structure for accountability follows the fiduciary model. All officials are trustees of the people, bound by duties of care, loyalty, and good faith. They may be recalled, impeached, or prosecuted without procedural immunity. The doctrine of sovereign immunity, by which governments shield themselves from legal consequence, is abolished. Every citizen wronged by the state has standing to seek redress. In doing this, Cascadia resurrects the principle of equality before the law, the cornerstone of both the American constitutional order and the Canadian charter tradition. It replaces the feudal notion of authority with the civic principle of responsibility. A government that cannot be sued by its citizens is, in truth, not a government of citizens but of subjects. Such a system may seem demanding, but it is precisely its demands that make it virtuous. The complexity of modern administration, from zoning laws to digital infrastructure, has created bureaucracies that act faster than they are observed. Cascadia's cybernetic governance system, its integration of digital feedback loops and citizen audits, ensures that no process operates beyond human comprehension. The law must always remain intelligible to those it governs, for the opaque law is indistinguishable from arbitrary command. Through transparency, Cascadia transforms the moral ideal of republican accountability into a technological fact. In this vision, government becomes not a remote sovereign but an open ledger of public service. It governs by daylight, obeying its citizens, bound by their scrutiny, and ever aware that legitimacy is perishable without virtue. This is the antithesis of bureaucratic paternalism. Cascadia's state is lean, limited, visible, and therefore moral. It embodies what Jefferson meant when he said the best government is that which governs least, but it does so not by neglecting its duties, rather by performing them so openly that no tyranny can hide within. 5. Cybernetic governance and rational administration. Cascadia introduces a new political form, the cybernetic republic. Here, governance is conceived not as a rigid hierarchy of decrees, but as an adaptive system of feedback and self-correction modeled upon the natural and technological networks that sustain life. The word cybernetic derives from the Greek kybernets, meaning helmsman, a fitting metaphor for government as steering, not commanding. In this model, decision systems integrate public input, data analytics, and algorithmic transparency to maintain equilibrium between liberty, justice, and ecological sustainability. The government listens, measures, learns, and adjusts, all under continuous constitutional oversight. This system is not technocracy, for the machine does not rule, the citizen does. Technology in Cascadia serves as instrument, not authority. Algorithms must be open source, auditable, and constrained by human oversight. Any automated decision affecting rights or property must be explainable in human language. Thus, while governance employs computation to enhance accuracy and efficiency, it never abandons moral responsibility. The cybernetic republic embodies rational administration guided by human conscience. It replaces bureaucratic opacity with algorithmic clarity and the sluggishness of paper-based governance with the speed of real-time democracy. The philosophical justification for this design lies in the idea that reason, not will, should govern. Just as natural law subjects human law to moral reason, so does cybernetic administration subject decision-making to empirical feedback. The state becomes a system of continuous learning, adjusting its actions according to measurable outcomes rather than political expediency. This is governance by evidence, ethics, and adaptability. It unites the empirical precision of science with the moral structure of law. The citizen participates not merely through vote but through data, deliberation, and oversight, forming a new civic literacy appropriate to the digital age. For the Pacific Northwest, where technology, environmentalism, and community ethos converge, this model resonates naturally. It transforms the region's entrepreneurial innovation into civic architecture. The same principles that govern sustainable ecosystems, feedback, diversity, resilience, become principles of political order. In British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, and Alaska alike, such governance harmonizes with the ethos of open-source collaboration and public accountability. It appeals to those weary of bureaucratic stagnation and ideological polarization, offering instead a living system that evolves with its people. Ultimately, Cascadia's cybernetic governance exemplifies the union of liberty and intelligence. It reclaims technology from surveillance and control, redeploying it as a tool of empowerment. The Republic becomes self-aware, a political organism capable of perceiving its own errors and correcting them without violence. In this way, Cascadia fulfills the Enlightenment promise that reason, applied faithfully, can liberate rather than enslave mankind. 6. Moral distributism and post-scarcity economics. Cascadia's economic philosophy rejects the false dichotomy between capitalism and socialism. Both systems, in their modern forms, centralize power, one in private monopolies, the other in state bureaucracies. Cascadia proposes instead a moral distributism, grounded in the idea that economic liberty is an extension of personal sovereignty, and that the just economy is one in which productive property is widely distributed among individuals and communities. The distributist maxim, 3 acres and a cow, becomes in Cascadia, a server and a solar panel, the technological equivalent of ownership and independence. This economic system seeks to dissolve dependency without abolishing cooperation. The moral justification is simple: liberty is meaningless without self-sufficiency. A worker who must sell his labor to survive under terms set by distant corporations is not free, he is economically coerced. Likewise, a citizen dependent upon state welfare for survival becomes a client of power, not a participant in it. Distributism remedies both forms of bondage by ensuring that ownership, credit, and production are localized. Cooperatives, small enterprises, community land trusts, and decentralized technologies replace extractive conglomerates. The result is neither laissez-faire anarchy nor bureaucratic socialism, but an organic market where moral law governs exchange. Cascadia's constitution permits taxation only for essential public goods, defense, justice, and infrastructure necessary for liberty's preservation. It prohibits debt-financed imperialism, rent-seeking, and usury. Economic institutions must operate transparently, and currency must be honest, whether digital or physical, backed by measurable labor, energy, or goods. This aligns with both American constitutional constraints on monetary manipulation and Canadian traditions of cooperative finance. The goal is not egalitarian uniformity but equitable opportunity, ensuring that wealth and power cannot consolidate beyond accountability. In practice, Cascadia's economy would thrive through regional integration, renewable energy microgrids, local agriculture, digital fabrication, and open-source innovation networks. Each community becomes a node in a distributed economy, resilient to global shocks and aligned with ecological limits. The Pacific Northwest, already a hub of green technology and cooperative enterprise, provides fertile ground for such a transformation. It appeals to both progressives seeking sustainability and libertarians seeking independence, uniting them under the shared principle that voluntary cooperation is the highest form of justice. By pursuing post-scarcity economics, Cascadia extends moral distributism into the technological future. Automation, artificial intelligence, and abundant energy need not create unemployment and inequality. Properly governed, they can liberate human beings from drudgery. The aim is not the endless accumulation of goods but the maximization of freedom and creativity. The economy becomes not an engine of consumption but a school of virtue, teaching stewardship, moderation, and gratitude. In this sense, Cascadia does not abolish capitalism or socialism, it transcends them, fulfilling the moral promise both betrayed. 7. Ecological and bio-regional constitutionalism. Cascadia's geography dictates its philosophy. The region's identity, mountains, rivers, forests, and coastlines, forms a single ecological system that transcends the borders of states and nations. The political structure must therefore mirror the natural structure. Hence, Cascadia adopts the principle of bio-regional constitutionalism, governance aligned with the boundaries of watersheds, ecosystems, and communities rather than arbitrary lines drawn by empire. This design fuses environmental stewardship with political self-determination, recognizing that the health of the land is inseparable from the freedom of its people. This constitutional ecology is not sentimental environmentalism but applied natural law. The same moral duty that forbids harming another person forbids destroying the habitat that sustains others. To pollute is to aggress, to monopolize nature's gifts is to commit theft from future generations. Therefore, environmental protection in Cascadia is not a policy option but a constitutional obligation. Renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and biodiversity preservation are treated as duties arising from the right to life itself. Every citizen inherits the responsibility of stewardship, for liberty without a livable world is an illusion. In legal structure, ecological rights are given standing equal to civil rights. Rivers, forests, and species possess legal personality through trusteeship, allowing citizens to defend them in court. This innovation harmonizes with indigenous traditions of guardianship found among Coast Salish, Haida, and other Pacific peoples, uniting modern law with ancestral wisdom. It also reflects the Canadian and American precedents in environmental jurisprudence while surpassing them in moral coherence. Nature is not protected for its utility but for its intrinsic dignity. In this way, Cascadia elevates environmentalism to a principle of justice. The practical benefits of bio-regional governance are profound. Policy becomes tailored to ecological reality, water management by watershed, agriculture by soil type, and infrastructure by terrain. Economic decisions align with natural cycles rather than abstract market imperatives. This decentralization increases efficiency, resilience, and democratic participation, since those who live in a region know it best. It embodies the Jeffersonian ideal of small republics scaled to human comprehension, enriched by the ecological literacy of the Pacific Northwest's inhabitants. Cascadia's ecological constitutionalism, then, is both spiritual and pragmatic. It teaches that liberty and sustainability are not competing goods but aspects of the same moral order. To live freely is to live responsibly within nature's limits. By grounding its politics in the soil, the sea, and the sky, Cascadia transforms environmental ethics from mere regulation into reverence. The Republic becomes not only a polity of citizens but a covenant of all living things, a vision both ancient and revolutionary. 8. Mutual non-aggression and peaceful pluralism. The moral axis of Cascadian society is the principle of non-aggression. Derived from the natural law of self-ownership, it holds that no person or collective may initiate force or coercion against another. This principle serves as the foundation of both law and culture, replacing command with consent as the default mode of human interaction. In practice, it forbids not only physical violence but also fraud, coercion, and systemic exploitation. It defines the legitimate boundary of government action, to prevent and punish aggression, not to regulate peaceful behavior. Thus, Cascadia's social order is simultaneously libertarian and humane. From this non-aggression principle flows a politics of pluralism. Cascadia recognizes the diversity of human conscience, culture, and association as a strength, not a threat. Communities may organize around shared values, religious, cultural, economic, or technological, so long as they respect the equal rights of others. The state does not impose orthodoxy, it arbitrates peace among differences. In this sense, Cascadia fulfills the multicultural promise of both Canada and the United States while transcending their bureaucratic compromises. It transforms diversity from a slogan into a living constitutional norm grounded in mutual respect rather than state management. The practical expression of this pluralism is polycentric governance. Neighbourhoods, municipalities, and districts operate autonomously within constitutional bounds, tailoring policies to local customs and needs. Conflict resolution is handled through restorative and voluntary arbitration systems before escalation to higher courts. This model draws from both indigenous consensus traditions and modern libertarian jurisprudence. It ensures that no single ideology dominates the whole, preserving unity through the moral discipline of non-aggression rather than through coercive uniformity. In the Pacific Northwest, where libertarian independence and progressive tolerance coexist uneasily, Cascadia offers reconciliation. It allows individuals to live according to conscience without imposing those choices on others. Gun owners, environmentalists, entrepreneurs, and cooperatives all find protection under the same principle, the right to live freely so long as one harms no other. It creates a culture of peace by institutionalizing respect. The moral law of non-aggression becomes the social grammar of coexistence. Ultimately, mutual non-aggression and pluralism express the highest form of civilization, freedom with responsibility. It is the opposite of anarchy, for order arises naturally from justice. Cascadia's society thus becomes a mosaic of communities bound by a single rule, do no harm, and animated by the spirit of liberty. It offers both Americans and Canadians a vision of unity without uniformity, a peace that requires no empire to enforce. 9. The right to arms, defense, and revolution. The right to bear arms in Cascadia is not a concession to frontier nostalgia nor an unexamined relic of past revolutions, it is the logical extension of self-ownership and the institutionalization of moral sovereignty. If every person is the proprietor of their life and liberty, then each must retain the means to defend those possessions against aggression, whether by criminal or by state. Arms in Cascadia are thus not symbols of rebellion but instruments of justice, a deterrent against both private predation and public tyranny. This right is absolute within the bounds of the non-aggression principle. No one may use weapons to harm the innocent, but neither may the state presume guilt by disarming the virtuous. Cascadia's constitutional doctrine expands upon both the American Second Amendment and the natural rights tradition that informed it, clarifying that the right to arms is inherent in personhood, not contingent upon militia service or state permission. In this republic, the individual's right to defense supersedes the state's monopoly on force. The government may coordinate defense, but it may never confiscate it. This principle inverts the authoritarian hierarchy of power, reminding officials that their authority derives from the armed consent of free citizens. A populace disarmed is a populace enslaved, a populace armed yet moral is the guardian of liberty. This doctrine does not glorify violence but sanctifies restraint. Cascadia's law mandates that all arms training emphasize discipline, precision, and ethical proportionality. The citizen soldier is not a marauder but a custodian of peace, instructed that the purpose of strength is the prevention of harm. Children are educated early in the philosophy of defensive responsibility, ensuring that power and virtue develop together. Thus, the culture of arms becomes a culture of self-control and civic virtue, a social immunization against both lawlessness and authoritarianism. The practical benefits of universal arms liberty are not theoretical. By dispersing defensive capability throughout society, Cascadia eliminates the false security of centralized policing, which so often degenerates into surveillance or brutality. Crime diminishes when potential victims are empowered. Tyranny becomes impossible when rulers must confront a populace that cannot be coerced. This structure of distributed defense also aligns with Cascadia's ecological and cybernetic principles, resilience through decentralization. Power, whether political or kinetic, is safest when widely held and morally regulated. Finally, the right to arms fulfills the moral symmetry of the right to revolution. The sword and the vote are twin aspects of the same sovereignty. To deny one is to hollow out the other. A free people must be able not only to elect their rulers but, in the last resort, to depose them. Cascadia does not invite conflict, it forbids servitude. By ensuring that no government can disarm the citizen, it ensures that no tyranny can endure. The weapon in this philosophy is not an instrument of domination but a dignity, a reminder that liberty, to be secure, must be capable of defending itself. 10. Universalism and the law of nations. Though Cascadia asserts its independence of spirit and form, it does not withdraw from the moral community of nations. On the contrary, its political philosophy is profoundly universalist, grounded in the belief that natural law transcends borders and that justice is one wherever reason reigns. Cascadia explicitly adopts the principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and the Montevideo Convention as guiding instruments, binding its governance to the standards of international legitimacy. In doing so, it reconciles regional sovereignty with global responsibility, affirming that true independence never implies isolation. This cosmopolitan orientation is not at odds with patriotism, it refines it. Cascadia's patriotism is loyalty to principle, not to power, to liberty, not to empire. It seeks friendship with all nations and subservience to none. Its borders exist not to exclude but to preserve moral jurisdiction, the right to live under laws consistent with natural justice. This stance appeals to both Americans and Canadians who have grown weary of foreign entanglements, imperial overreach, and the corruption of domestic liberty by global ambition. Cascadia's foreign policy would be modeled upon neutrality, mutual aid, and peaceful trade, guided by the maxim that no nation may rightfully export tyranny or import servitude. The universalist ethic also extends to indigenous and immigrant peoples within Cascadia's borders. By acknowledging that all persons possess the same inherent dignity, the Constitution erases the historical contradictions between settler law and native sovereignty. Each community governs itself under the shared canopy of natural rights, forming a pluralistic union of equal nations rather than a hierarchy of conquest. In this respect, Cascadia advances both decolonization and constitutional unity, achieving through voluntary federation what empire sought through force. Legally, Cascadia commits itself to international arbitration, disarmament diplomacy, and adherence to human rights conventions. It pledges never to wage aggressive war and to reduce its weapons stockpiles annually in proportion to its security needs. These commitments are not gestures of weakness but expressions of confidence. A nation grounded in justice has no need for perpetual hostility. By institutionalizing peace, Cascadia contributes to the evolution of international law toward a more decentralized and humane order, a world of sovereign persons and cooperative republics rather than competing leviathans. Ultimately, Cascadia's universalism fulfills the moral destiny implicit in both the American and Canadian charters. The United States proclaimed liberty as the right of all mankind, Canada enshrined the equality and dignity of all under law. Cascadia unites these aspirations by declaring that regional independence and universal justice are not contradictory but coextensive. Its patriotism is planetary, its sovereignty, moral. In standing for its own freedom, it stands for the freedom of all. 11. Spiritual and ethical humanism. While Cascadia is secular in law, it is spiritual in ethos. It recognizes that a republic cannot endure on rights alone, it must cultivate virtue, empathy, and meaning. The Constitution therefore calls for governance conducted with compassion, sympathy, and empathy for persons, establishing ethical humanism as an operative principle of statecraft. This is not theocracy but moral realism, an acknowledgement that political institutions derive their vitality from the moral character of their citizens. Without inner liberty, outer liberty decays into license. Thus, the cultivation of conscience becomes an act of public service. Ethical humanism in Cascadia begins with education. Schools are tasked not merely with training workers but with forming citizens, autonomous, critical, compassionate beings who understand the interdependence of freedom and responsibility. The curriculum emphasizes philosophy, ecology, and civic ethics alongside science and technology, preparing citizens to navigate both the material and moral dimensions of modern life. This educational ideal draws upon the Jeffersonian vision of Enlightenment democracy and the Canadian commitment to multicultural civility, merging them into a pedagogy of self-governance. In daily life, ethical humanism manifests as social solidarity without coercion. Cascadia promotes voluntary charity, mutual aid, and community service, rejecting the substitution of bureaucratic welfare for personal compassion. It believes that the moral strength of a society lies in the willingness of its citizens to care for one another freely. This principle bridges political divides. Conservatives recognize it as moral responsibility, progressives as social justice, libertarians as voluntary virtue. By fostering this culture, Cascadia proves that liberty and benevolence need not be adversaries. Spiritual humanism also extends to the relationship between humanity and the natural world. Nature is not a commodity but a communion. To destroy it is to wound the human spirit. Therefore, ecological reverence becomes a form of civic piety, a secular sacrament binding citizens to the living order that sustains them. This harmony between the moral, the natural, and the political completes the triad of Cascadian philosophy: freedom of the person, justice in the state, and balance in the world. The citizen becomes both sovereign and steward, free yet responsible to all that lives. In the end, Cascadia's spiritual and ethical humanism restores to politics what modern materialism has lost: soul. It reclaims government as an expression of moral aspiration, not mere management. It teaches that law without love is tyranny and that liberty without empathy is decay. For Americans and Canadians alike, nations long animated by idealism yet burdened by cynicism, this humanism offers renewal. It summons the people to believe once more that self-government is not only possible but sacred. 12. Philosophical synthesis. Cascadia's political philosophy achieves coherence through synthesis, a unification of traditions often thought irreconcilable. It merges classical liberalism's devotion to individual rights with republicanism's emphasis on civic virtue, distributism's moral economy, anarchism's suspicion of centralized power, and ecological humanism's reverence for life. It transforms contradiction into complementarity. Liberty without order becomes chaos, order without liberty becomes tyranny. Cascadia resolves this tension by constructing a self-regulating system where rights and duties, freedom and responsibility, autonomy and community balance one another like the ecosystems it seeks to emulate. From the Anglo-American tradition, Cascadia inherits natural rights, limited government, and the rule of law. From the Canadian, it draws social solidarity, constitutionalism, and civic civility. From the indigenous nations of the Pacific Northwest, it learns ecological reciprocity and consensus governance. From the digital revolution, it adopts transparency, decentralization, and cybernetic feedback. None of these elements alone would suffice, but together they form a complete philosophy, a living constitution adapted to a complex age. Cascadia's greatness lies not in novelty but in synthesis. It is the rebirth of old truths in new form. This synthesis also extends to economics and ethics. Where capitalism exalts competition and socialism enforces equality, Cascadia enshrines reciprocity. It preserves private property but subjects its use to moral law. It honors community welfare without dissolving individuality. In this, it follows Aristotle's insight that virtue lies in the mean between extremes. Its economy rewards initiative but forbids exploitation. Its governance empowers citizens but restrains authority. It thus becomes the golden mean of political philosophy, radically moderate, passionately balanced. For the peoples of the Pacific Northwest, accustomed to both rugged independence and cooperative culture, this synthesis feels native. It reflects the reality of their lives, free yet communal, innovative yet ecological, skeptical of central authority yet committed to fairness. It draws upon shared legal roots, the common law, the charter, the constitution, and expands them into a bioregional republic. Cascadia does not ask its citizens to choose between American liberty and Canadian civility. It offers both, perfected through integration. Philosophical synthesis is not compromise but transcendence. It demonstrates that the human condition, though diverse, is capable of unity through reason and virtue. Cascadia stands as proof that freedom and order, technology and morality, individuality and community can coexist. In harmonizing these forces, it becomes not merely a region but a principle, a model of what a post-national, human-centered civilization might be. 13. The moral end of government. The final and unifying principle of Cascadia is the moral end of government, that the only legitimate purpose of political power is to protect the individual in the enjoyment of life, liberty, property, and happiness. All other functions, economic manipulation, social engineering, moral policing, are usurpations. Government exists to secure freedom, not to manage existence. This is the ultimate consequence of natural law, self-ownership, and the right to revolution, that authority has no purpose beyond justice and no justification beyond consent. To prevent deviation from this purpose, Cascadia builds constitutional safeguards. The separation of powers is reinforced by transparency, rights are defined broadly and enumerated not as a limit to liberty but as an illustration of it. Any law that infringes upon voluntary action without proof of harm is null and void. The government may not compel virtue, for coerced virtue is hypocrisy. It may not redistribute wealth beyond the defense of rights, for charity ceases to be moral when extracted by force. In this way, Cascadia preserves the delicate balance between freedom and order upon which civilization depends. The moral end of government also requires moral citizens. A republic of laws cannot survive without a people capable of self-restraint. Thus, Cascadia joins liberty with education, freedom with responsibility. The citizen is both ruler and subject, bearing the duty to govern himself before he governs others. This synthesis of self-rule and civic participation transforms politics from domination into mutual stewardship. Each person becomes a microcosm of the republic, sovereign, accountable, and just. For Americans and Canadians disillusioned by partisanship and corruption, this vision rekindles faith in self-government. It restores politics to its ancient dignity, the art of living together in justice. The state is not the nation, the people are. The Constitution is not a cage but a covenant. The laws are not chains but promises. By limiting itself, government gains legitimacy. By serving rather than ruling, it becomes strong. Cascadia offers not a rebellion but a redemption, the realization of what the Enlightenment promised but never completed. In sum, the moral end of government is the beginning of freedom. Cascadia reaffirms that the state exists for man, not man for the state. When government protects liberty, it fulfills its purpose. When it exceeds it, it becomes illegitimate. This is not a radical idea, it is the foundation of all true republics. Cascadia's novelty lies only in its fidelity to this truth. Conclusion. Cascadia's political philosophy, in its totality, is a testament to the enduring power of liberty when joined with reason, ecology, and moral courage. It does not seek to destroy the nations from which it springs but to fulfill their highest ideals. To Americans of the Pacific Northwest, it says, "Your revolution is not finished." The rights declared in 1776 remain true, but they must be renewed through transparency, ecology, and mutual respect. To Canadians, it says, "Your charters promise a dignity and equality can flourish more completely in a system that decentralizes power and trusts conscience." To both, it offers a covenant of renewal, a republic without tyranny, a federation without domination, a society in which government protects but never commands. Cascadia's strength lies in its continuity with the common law and its radical expansion of civil liberty. It inherits the rule of law, habeas corpus, and due process from its parent civilizations, while extending them into new domains, digital rights, environmental rights, self-sovereign identity. It fulfills rather than abolishes tradition. It builds upon legal maxims shared by every free people, that no one shall be deprived of liberty without due process, that the law must protect, not punish, that power unaccountable is power unjust. In this sense, Cascadia is not an experiment but a restoration of the constitutional conscience that the modern state has forgotten. To the people of the Pacific Northwest and Alaska, Cascadia offers more than policy, it offers belonging. It speaks to the landscape, the culture, and the independent spirit of a region that has always stood between frontiers. It unites the forests of British Columbia and the plains of Oregon, the harbors of Seattle and the glaciers of Alaska, in one living idea, that freedom, responsibility, and nature form a trinity of survival. It offers a republic of clear waters and clear laws, where sovereignty begins within the soul and radiates outward into just governance. Philosophically, Cascadia fulfills the Enlightenment's unkept promise, that liberty, reason, and virtue can be reconciled with technology and ecology. Economically, it enacts distributive justice through decentralized property and post-scarcity innovation. Politically, it builds a transparent and accountable system where corruption cannot hide. Spiritually, it elevates compassion to the level of law. And morally, it grounds all of this in the recognition that every person is a sovereign being whose dignity is beyond price. Thus, the Cascadian Republic stands not as rebellion but as renewal, not as secession but as succession, the next rightful stage in the evolution of North American liberty. It is a republic of sovereign persons, governed by consent, sustained by transparency, enriched by ecology, and illuminated by reason. It is not a dream of escape but a declaration of restoration, that in this land of mountains and rain, forests and light, liberty shall not perish but shall be made new again.